The sound pierced the air like a cry for help. A baby cried incessantly inside a plane that had barely taken off from New York. Passengers exchanged irritated glances, some huffing, others turning their heads away, trying to feign patience. In the first-class seat, the man in the expensive suit seemed oblivious, motionless, staring blankly into space. Beside him, the small body trembled with tears, the son he barely knew how to soothe. The flight attendant hurried past, offering mechanical smiles, but no one did anything. No one wanted to get involved. The discomfort was collective, as if the crying was someone's fault. And yet no one knew that the baby was the son of one of the richest men in the United States. On that flight, everyone judged the sound, but no one saw the pain behind it. No one imagined that on that same plane, an unknown boy about to change entire lives hadn't even gotten off the plane yet. Everyone on the plane ignored the billionaire's baby. Until one black boy did the unthinkable. The airplane aisle felt like a silent theater. Every face a mask of impatience, every look a disguised judgment. The baby's sound, now hoarser, more desperate, had become the center of a collective discomfort. Some people whispered, others just sighed loudly, as if the simple act of listening were an unbearable burden. In his first-class seat, Ethan Wallace, one of the country's wealthiest businessmen, remained silent. His sunken eyes betrayed sleepless nights, and his rigid posture was an attempt to hide what he felt: weakness. Since losing his wife 3 months earlier, his baby, Liam, had become his only link to what remained of humanity. But he couldn't handle that crying. The sound seemed to tear away pieces of the grief he pretended not to feel. Meanwhile, the hastily hired nanny tried to rock the boy unsuccessfully. And people stared as if they were facing a luxurious nuisance. With all that money, couldn't you have hired someone who knew how to care for a child? Murmured a middle-aged woman, adjusting her headphones. A man behind her added, "Rich people think they can do anything, even bother others. In each seat there is a different type of judgment. Some condemn out of envy, others out of habit. Few, if any, try to understand. But the curious thing is that no one there knew what was really going on. No one imagined that this billionaire, accustomed to controlling companies and destinies, was now at the mercy of his own son's crying, something that not all the money in the world could solve." The flight continued amidst clouds and sighs. The soft yellow lights illuminated the contrast, luxury and solitude, power and vulnerability. And amid the murmur of complaints, a childish voice whispered something in aisle 27. It was just a boy observing everything silently, curious, attentive, different. He hadn't done anything yet, but the calm in his eyes contrasted with the tension around him. While everyone hid behind headphones and gazes, he simply observed. He didn't judge, he didn't complain. He observed. Maybe he was the only one on that entire plane who saw beyond the noise. People didn't know who was in that first-class seat, and what that crying represented. How many times do we judge without understanding the story behind it? His name was Ethan Wallace. And if you typed that into Google, you'd find headlines about technology, investing, and philanthropy. Magazines called him the billionaire who reinvented the future. But there, in that leather first-class seat, he didn't look like the successful man pictured on magazine covers. He just looked like a dad who didn't know what else to do. Liam's cries cut through the air and pierced the mask of coldness Ethan tried to maintain. Each sob from the baby seemed to remind him of the hospital, of the wilted flowers, of the empty room where his wife Emily's voice had once echoed. She had died during childbirth, and ever since, the sound of his son was both what kept him alive. And what hurt the most, Ethan looked out the window, trying to hide his face. The sunlight reflected off the glass, creating the outline of an exhausted man. It was curious. The world saw him as a symbol of power, but the mirror showed him broken. There, he was the richest man on the plane. Yes, but also the most lost. The nanny tried to hand the baby over to him to calm him down. He refused, embarrassed. "No, I don't know how." The words were low, almost whispered, but they were like an internal scream. The man who bought companies, who decided the fate of thousands of employees, didn't know how to hold his own son. And the saddest part was realizing how the world judged you for it. Every look they cast upon you carried a mixture of contempt and envy. It was as if people believed money should solve everything, even grief. Ethan remembered his last conversation with Emily. She'd said, "Love isn't something you buy. Ethan, it's something you give." At the time, he'd smiled blankly. Now, in the turbulent silence of that flight, the phrase echoed like a punishment. With every tear Liam shed, he saw his own guilt. It wasn't just a baby crying. It was the pain he was trying to hide, screaming back at him. It's curious how suffering doesn't distinguish classes. Inside an airplane, everyone breathes the same air. The same sound that bothers the rich disturbs the poor. But what separates people isn't the noise. It's how they react to it. As Ethan sank into memories, the boy from aisle 27 continued to watch. His eyes were watchful, curious, almost compassionate. There was something different about this boy, a serenity that clashed with the chaos around him, and it would be precisely this calm, apparently unimportant, that would change the course of that flight. Money buys comfort, but it doesn't buy silence or peace. The scene slowly shifts from Ethan's exhausted gaze to the boy from aisle 27, who adjusts a small backpack on his lap, watching everything with a gleam in his eye, while the adults wallowed in complaints and bored looks. In aisle 17, a boy observed the world with the quiet curiosity of someone who understands more than he lets on. His name was Noah Williams. He was 12 years old, with skin as dark as his grandmother's breakfast, and eyes so expressive they seemed to hold ancient secrets. Noah was traveling alone. He'd boarded the flight with a small blue backpack, carrying a change of clothes, a sketchbook, and a note he read from time to time, the address of the hospital where his grandmother was being treated in Los Angeles. She had always been his only family, and now he was crossing the country to see her again. While the first-class passengers exchanged disapproving glances, Noah simply listened. The baby's crying didn't irritate him. On the contrary, it bothered him for another reason. It was a sound he knew well, a sound of loss, of fear, of absence. He remembered being younger and crying alone in the cold house, waiting for his grandmother to come home from work. He knew what it was like to cry and have no one come. Between one turbulence and another, Noah noticed the man in the expensive suit trying to hide his face. The baby in the nanny's arms trembled. People pretended to be asleep. He thought, how come no one sees this? It's strange how other people's noise always seems more bothersome than our own. People complain about the noise, but they never ask themselves what causes it. Noah took his notebook out of his backpack and scribbled something. He drew a baby with wings, sleeping in the lap of a tired man. He smiled. Then he looked ahead, took a deep breath and muttered to himself, I think I can help, but help who? A billionaire? A stranger? The boy hesitated. He thought of his grandmother, of the stories she told about empathy and courage. Kindness, my grandson, is like music. It only plays when you allow yourself to hear it. Her words echoed loudly within him. Meanwhile, a more impatient passenger called the flight attendant, asking them to do something about the crying. The atmosphere grew tense. Noah noticed the tension spreading through the plane like an invisible current. And that's when he made his decision. Slowly, he unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. Some passengers looked at him disapprovingly, others simply ignored him. But the boy walked steadily toward first class. The sound of crying guided him like a compass. Each step seemed to defy an invisible rule, that the poor do not cross the borders of luxury. When he stopped in front of Ethan and the nanny, everyone fell silent. Curious eyes turned to the thin, simple boy, his heart bigger than his fear. Sometimes, what the world calls poor are precisely those who have the most to offer. Ethan looked at him in surprise. No one understood what that boy would do. Not even him. But in just a few seconds, Noah would transform that plane and the heart of the richest man on board. For a moment, the entire plane hovered. The roar of the engines seemed distant, muffled by collective curiosity. Everyone stared at the thin, plainly dressed boy, standing before the richest man on board. Ethan looked at him confusedly, as if trying to figure out if this was real. "Can I try?" Noah asked, his voice calm, almost sweet. The nanny hesitated, looked at her employer. Ethan, exhausted, simply nodded. There was nothing left to lose. And then, the boy held out his arms with a delicacy unexpected from someone so young. Liam, the baby, stopped crying for a second, intrigued. It was as if he felt something different in that touch, a calm that came not from wealth, but from truth. Noah began to sing. His voice was soft, timid at first, then grew stronger, filling the air like a warm breeze. It was an old song, one his grandmother used to sing on difficult nights. "Hush, little baby, don't you cry." The melody was simple, but there was something magical there, not because of the music, but because of the feeling. People, previously impatient, were now mesmerized. Some turned off their headphones, others leaned forward in their seats to get a better look. Even the flight attendant, who had been walking down the aisle, stopped. That boy sang as if healing invisible wounds, and then the impossible happened. Liam fell asleep. The baby, who had been crying for almost an hour, was now breathing peacefully, his serene little face resting against the boy's shoulder. The plane fell silent. Not the awkward silence of before, but a reverent silence, like that of a church after a prayer. Ethan, still not understanding, let out a tear. Not because of the miracle itself, but because he realized something inside him had also calmed. His son's crying always reminded him of pain. Now it reminded him of hope. It's funny how purity sometimes disarms pride. A boy who had nothing had just given the most powerful man on the plane what he'd been searching for months: peace. Noah stood there for a few minutes, rocking the baby. Then he handed her back to the nanny and smiled. "He just needed a song," he said softly before walking away. No one dared applaud. It was as if everyone was afraid to break the spell. But inside each passenger something stirred, a reminder that kindness has no color, class, or price. Ethan watched the boy return to the aisle seat 17. He tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come. What he felt couldn't be put into neat sentences. The first class, accustomed to ignoring the world, now listened. In silence, the plane felt different. The sound of crying had ceased, replaced by a deep, almost reverent silence. Ethan Wallace still stood there, motionless, trying to process what had just happened. The boy, Noah Williams, had done the unthinkable. He had calmed the son of a billionaire, something no luxury, expensive toy, or sophisticated technology could accomplish. Ethan looked at Liam, who was now sleeping peacefully, propped up in the nanny's arms. A strange feeling washed over him, gratitude mixed with disbelief, and something deeper, a humility he hadn't felt in months. He remembered how many times he'd tried to solve everything with money, how many times he'd believed status would buy happiness or control. None of that worked against the simplicity of a genuine gesture. There was the richest man on the plane, accustomed to manipulating markets, buying islands and shaping empires. And he found himself powerless in the face of the courage and empathy of a boy traveling alone, carrying only a worn backpack and an open heart. First-class passengers began to notice the change. Some still whispered, but no longer impatiently. Now there was respect, silent admiration. Some amateur photographers and discreet travelers discreetly raised their phones, capturing not wealth, but kindness. Ethan took a deep breath, and for the first time that flight truly smiled. It wasn't a smile of power or arrogance, but the smile of a relieved father, a man who understood that love and compassion are priceless. Noah, realizing he had accomplished his mission without expecting recognition, returned to his seat. He wasn't seeking applause, rewards, or fame. For him, simply seeing the baby at peace was enough. How often do we ignore simple gestures, believing that the world moves only through great actions or wealth? Sometimes, what truly transforms lives is a touch of empathy, An act of quiet courage, a heart willing to listen and act. Ethan looked at Noah, trying to find words to express everything he felt. Finally he did. "Thanks, kid," he said in a choked voice. Noah just smiled, looking away shyly. Sometimes the real luxury is having a clean heart. And there, on that plane, crossing the skies of America, the lesson was clear. No amount of money in the world could buy the peace that a pure heart provides. The plane touched down in Los Angeles, and passengers began to stand, gathering their bags and adjusting their clothes. But Ethan Wallace remained motionless for a moment, staring at Noah, who was carefully stowing his backpack as if nothing had happened. There was something about that boy that couldn't be bought or immediately understood. As soon as the door opened, Ethan made a decision no wealth protocol had ever taught him. He approached the boy. Each step was hesitant, filled with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Noah watched him calmly, already accustomed to dealing with strangers, but he couldn't help but notice the intensity in the billionaire's gaze. "Noah," Ethan began, his voice firm but cracking, I don't know how to thank you. What you did is priceless." Noah just smiled, resting his hand on his backpack. "No need to thank me, sir. I just sang to the baby. He needed to be calmed, and I know what it's like when no one listens." The nanny approached, somewhat relieved but still surprised. The other passengers looked on, intrigued by the unusual scene. The richest man on the plane, visibly moved, thanking a boy who, to the world, might seem insignificant. Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, genuine humility. You traveled alone, faced all this alone, and yet you thought of others. That's more than courage. That's kindness. Noah took a deep breath, remembering his grandmother and the lessons she had always taught him. That kindness and courage show themselves in the most unexpected moments. "Even when no one sees them, I only did what I could," he replied sincerely. Ethan, thrilled, offered a reward. But Noah refused with a firm shake of his head. "I'm not doing it for the money. I just want the baby to be okay." It's amazing how simple gestures can touch hearts that no amount of wealth could reach. The most powerful man on the plane realized that his world of luxury and control was worthless compared to the purity of a selfless act. And then, as if the universe confirmed its lesson, Noah began to sing again, this time in the airport lobby. Liam, still in his nanny's arms, smiled and shook his head. People around stopped, watching this scene that defied all logic of power and wealth. It was there that the richest man on the plane discovered that love has no price, nor social class. The airport lobby was bustling, but for a few minutes it seemed like just Ethan, Noah, and Liam. The crowd passing by barely registered the intensity of the encounter. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling for the first time the weight of what a simple act of kindness could create. He looked at the boy and said, "Noah, you have a rare heart. I want you to know that what you did will not be forgotten. I want to help you in any way you'll allow." Noah looked at him hesitantly. He wasn't used to promises from such powerful people. His life had always required effort, courage, and humility. But something in the billionaire's gaze seemed genuine, without ulterior motives, without imposition. "Just recognition, my grandmother," Noah began, his voice breaking. "She's in the hospital. I just wanted to see her, that's all." Ethan nodded, understanding. He knew that grand gestures aren't always measured in wealth or power. But there was an opportunity to unite two worlds that would normally never meet. "Then I promise you something," Ethan said firmly. "I'll help her. Not with money to buy things, but with whatever it takes to make her feel better." Noah smiled, surprised and moved. The billionaire's promise was unlike anything he had ever imagined. It was real, sincere, without spectacle, without ostentation. It was a bridge between different lives, built by the compassion of a young heart and the recognition of someone who already had everything except full humanity. Some stories begin with a cry and end with a chain of kindness that multiplies. Noah didn't need a reward. Ethan didn't need to be remembered as a hero. But together, they showed that simple gestures can cross social barriers, unite different worlds, and transform lives. Liam, asleep again in the nanny's arms, seemed to bless this silent encounter. Noah held tight to his backpack, but now he felt something different. Hope. And Ethan, for the first time in months, felt the lightness of a heart that finally understood that empathy and generosity are priceless. The story that began with a cry ended up healing more hearts than anyone could imagine. The plane had already been unloaded, and everyone's lives were going on as normal. But for Ethan Wallace and Noah Williams, nothing would ever be the same again. A simple act of kindness had transcended status, wealth, and social class. That story began with a heartbreaking cry and ended with a lesson no amount of money could buy. How often do we ignore small gestures, thinking our routine is more important than paying attention to others? Noah didn't have wealth, but he had something that Ethan, even surrounded by power and luxury, had lost: genuine empathy, quiet courage, and the ability to act without expecting anything in return. Ethan now understood. True value isn't in expensive cars, jets, or titles, but in the ability to care, to touch lives authentically. Liam, lulled by Noah's singing, was living proof that compassion transforms, heals, and brings together people who, at first glance, seem from different worlds. Perhaps the miracle of the plane was not just to calm the baby, but to remind the richest man in the country and every passenger, every spectator, that kindness is priceless and true courage is not measured by age, color, or social status. Noah, sitting back in his seat, stared out the window, calm, needing no recognition. Ethan approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. There were no more words, only understanding. The seemingly impossible had happened, and the lesson would remain forever. The black boy did the unthinkable. But perhaps the real miracle was reminding us that empathy is what makes us human. If this story touched you, like it now, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. Here we tell stories that restore faith in humanity. And share this video. Maybe someone needs a reminder today that kindness still exists. The plane, now empty, was just a symbol of what had happened, the simplicity of a gesture, the power of a pure heart, and the certainty that even in the most unexpected places, miracles happen.